Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the SOPP, the Southern Oregon Progressive Podcast. As always, I'm Kevin Bell, and with me is our amazing collection. Happy July 27th, everybody. As always, is our co host, Betsy Cunningham, the person who really makes this show run, the one that I know I couldn't do. Go. Thanks for
You
Betsy,
could.
dude.
I just have more time on my hands.
They're my inspiration. And with us today, we have Dan Zaner, uh, John Hunter, and Zach Whitworth. And again, Paul with you? I'm sorry. Yeah, sweet. Person. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Today we're going to be talking about the city parks of Roseburg, really, and who's in charge and what's going on over there. This will probably be mostly you, Betsy, because unfortunately I'm again out on the coast, and parks, my opinion on the parks department out here is way different in Reedsport because it's really a community, a committee based organization with a lot of like civic input. But from what I'm hearing from you guys is that it's like the complete opposite.
And actually, probably the show is going to be really more about what Dane and Zach and Paul have to say. And Dane's going to go first on the harm reduction side. And so Dane Zahner, community activist in lots of issues, but certainly an expert in harm reduction uh, out on the streets in the city park. So Dane.
Yeah, Dean Daner, Douglas County community member, and just I've been involved in harm reduction for a long time. And, I think it's dear to my heart is just our goals in harm reduction is meeting people where they're at and making sure if they're doing illicit substance, they're doing it safely, reduction of HIV, Hep C. And I think we can touch a little bit on Hep C in Oregon. I mean, we're number 3 in deaths and new infections. Pretty astronomical numbers there too. And typically that Hep C can always be correlated. So I think it's just been kind of a challenging time period lately. Friday didn't help with, the new executive order includes harm reduction. And I think, harm reduction is such a cheaper aspect of funding to make sure that people are safeguarded, where HIV is going to be about 500,000 for a lifetime, and you're looking at 36,000. We'll just use that as a base, depending on the treatment for Hep C. And then you can't fix the overdose deaths. And I think that's one thing that was challenging recently in one of our communities is that they looked at injectable naloxone as one of the opportunities of syringes taking when you're meeting people where they're at and they're living in the parks. I think the dynamic is that the challenge is why do we have people living in our parks, not why is harm reduction taken to closer at hand than where people are, because distance, or we have a transportation barrier, so we don't have a transportation system really in our community. And so people getting to office in the last 4 or 5 years, we've actually taken harm reduction. And you've seen model agencies do that across the state to the street and taking it closer at hand. And that has just been a proven strategy to reduce people's harm. And we really look at HIV, Hep C, skin tissue issues, if they're reusing equipment, and then the overdose deaths. And, injectable naloxone is much more cost affordable for a lot of agencies that distribute it versus the nasal. And so I think, it's challenging when we may see outcomes later on from decisions where you limit people's access to new equipment. And if there's, could possibly be reusing, that's going to result in skin tissue issues. If they share equipment, you're going to see, chances of HIV and Hep C rising. And as I kind of mentioned beforehand, Hep C is already something that, is a challenge for the state of Oregon. And why is that? It's correlated back to illicit substance use disorder. And so I think we have people using illicit substances in Oregon, and it's a challenge. And, decreasing access is not going to help people change that outcome. And we know that. And that is a strategy that didn't work. That's why in the original days of the epidemic, we saw a lot of HIV And, yes, it was originally with gay men. And then once it got into the illicit substance users that use syringes, it became even more challenging. So I think we got to go forward. We can't go backwards. I think that executive order touches on overdose prevention sites. That's a model. That is something that, we have seen Canada and we've seen other countries implement a strategy of harm reduction locations where people can go use, but also have treatment access, housing resources. Those are all barriers that people faced. And I think I'd like to come back to one thing I didn't touch on. Not all unhoused people do illicit substances. I think that's where you really have to look at the data, and some data that got presented to one of our communities that is challenging syringe exchange in public places like parks and the city properties. That is going to that's a challenge. And so I think, we just have to look at different ways, and overdose prevention locations, as mentioned, is not an option. We're seeing them in New York City, we're seeing them in Rhode Island, and they're working. And when you have that whole treatment aspect, but I do want to go, I kind of forgot my train of thought, but we did present that not everybody's using illicit substance. There's some other issues out there, and we need to look at how to get mental health out to the street. We need to look at how to get other addiction. Alcohol is not looked at by the state. There's not a lot of funding. There's not a lot of funding on the federal government level on alcohol addiction. And, we need to look at those aspects because alcohol is an issue out there. Homelessness is an issue, and the lack of housing, it's a big picture. And I think, we're looking at one thing that's easy to sway public opinion, and that is illicit substance use done by syringes. That's challenging for some community members. They don't quite understand it. But, offering a syringe to somebody that's using illicit substance is no different than it's a proven strategy of putting a seatbelt on in your car. And put your kid, I went camping this weekend or for the last week, and my dogs were all in life jackets because it's a strategy to reduce the harm if a dog falls overboard. And those are just proven strategies to reduce their harm. No different than handing a syringe if somebody's using an illicit substance. We have to deal with the illicit substance use. And right now, our country's at an epidemic, our state's at an epidemic, and it kind of continues to go upward. And a lot of that might fall back on, housing issues, living on the streets, but not all people living on the streets are doing, illicit substances. A lot of them are doing illegal substances. So I think it's kind of a scapegoat. And so on that, I'll just kind of see if you have other questions, Betsy, or need me to refine some of that and touch on.
Or anybody else who has one. But for one, for clarification, for some of us know all the things you're talking about, right? But one of the things I thought about in actually combining the two subjects, what's happening at Fir Grove Park and what's happened here, is the process that went down to for the city council to pass a rule that you cannot distribute needles, right? I mean, that's the issue. And harm reduction in this context is about needle use, high hypodermic needle use for drugs, right? And so this is the big issue, that all the things that you mentioned are about reducing the harm of all those things by having this. And this needle exchanges, man, they've been going on before I moved here. That was 35 years ago in LA. I mean, they understood the need to try to reduce, infections like hepatitis C, for example, from illegal drug use and shared needles. So to me, it's kind of this policy issue, like who's making the rules. And I was, what came to the one hearing that they had at the Homeless Commission, where you made a presentation about trying to find a way to do it so it's not in the park. But even some people want to make it illegal everywhere. That didn't actually happen, but on any public property. So to me, it seemed like it was driven more by the staff, and that includes a police department, as opposed to the people like on the homeless commission actually voted to allow your suggestion to voluntarily try to move and shift it. So, what happened there?
I think it was the dynamics is that it was kind of a one-sided conversation with the community leadership, and I don't know if the city council actually was involved in some of the homeless commission. I'm not sure why the homeless commission was brought forward there first, because yes, it's a dynamic of we have some people living in our park. Some of them are using illicit substances, and that's their home, and we're not looking at people's homes where people might be using illicit substances. Not all of our clients are homeless, and not all homeless are doing illicit substance, but I think it was kind of a scapegoat, and I think there were some maybe not understanding public health and the stance of why syringe exchange is an important piece of the puzzle and the addiction crisis right now, especially with the fentanyl epidemic, and methamphetamines also are a lot of people inject those. So I think stopping access is not going to stop addiction, and is just going to create, reuse of syringes, possible sharing of syringes. In this case, lack of access to naloxone, which we know saves lives by having it readily available. And injection form, like I mentioned, is much more cost affordable than the nasal form. But I don't know. I think the dynamic was there wasn't a real good public discussion, and that would include education on harm reduction and helping people understand the dynamics of, look at one piece of that is like people think you can put somebody in treatment and they're going to be all better. Tomorrow they're going to be just, ready to go, ready to roll. That's not how it works, and we see that treatment providers are handing out naloxone too because people struggle, and so Oregon has an issue with access to care for people that need the detox and need, Roseburg has the one facility in Southern Oregon that facilitates Curry, Coos, Douglas, some of Josephine, in-house care for people to detox and then get into treatment. And, we've seen the jail go forward and getting treatment going into the jail, which I think is amazing. And that dynamic is like, if we're having a county jail actually provide treatment while somebody's incarcerated, if that's the option that you have available to you, great. We're actually supporting somebody through their addiction while they're incarcerated, maybe getting them some mental health. I'm hoping that's happening as part of that treatment program, because it's not just about the illicit substance use. Yes, that's a big majority part, but what about the mental health aspect about that? What about making sure they have housing, when they're released from jail? So I think, we're seeing some success in the county jail with treatment access and the RSAP program, and also other options where they've gotten some grants to expand that to more population in the jail. But you have one county jail that's doing that in the state of Oregon. So I think, I don't know. It's so that kind of sends a misguard is like, okay, so the county is realizing there's an issue and an epidemic, and so they're trying to help support the people that are addicted with some treatment access, because you need to expand that, and Oregon has a lack of that right now. So, and I think that was the main issue with Measure 110 is that, they should have been much more honest when they presented 110 that, the boots on the ground worked. You got people out there, you got peers, you got community healthcare workers that were supported, and they're meeting people where they're at, helping them navigate these programs, connecting them to care. And maybe that's harm reduction too, and having agencies do harm reduction for somebody that's not quite ready. Because until somebody's ready to change, I know it took me 3 years to be able to be ready. And, there's this 3 years of struggle. And I started and I stopped. I started and I stopped. And that's a traditional aspect of getting the care. But I think there's a disconnect in the community. And part of that is education of community leaders and making sure our community leaders and understand public health, and from a public health stance that, look at Indiana, they reduced access to new equipment, and immediately saw 150 new HIV infections. And that doesn't, I don't know what the number of Hep C, but there were multiple Hep C in that same community. And so there's some articles where in Texas where they reduced at harm reduction resources and immediately saw within 6 months to 12 months, 10 new infections of HIV. That's concerning. And so any limit is going to encourage reuse of equipment, and skin tissue issues untreated, that can be some challenging. And I think, so from a cost-effective method, how do you give people access to new equipment so that they can be safeguarded? And that includes naloxone, it includes syringes, it might include some protein supplies in some of our communities too. And that's a safer aspect and it eliminates syringes, it eliminates diseases if used properly. So I think those are all things that need education, I think, is the key, and getting buy-in from leadership of the local community to understand that, because I don't think it's sporadic in where it's happening. And I think Oregon's always understood what harm reduction is, and I think it needs more involvement from public health, addiction, and multiple more partners. But I kind of was confused why I went to the Homeless Commission, because they're automatically assuming that if you're homeless, you're using illicit substances, and that's not the case. And and you have to look at the numbers of how many syringes somebody might use and be realistic of what is going to safeguard somebody in an act of addiction. I hope that helps. I mean, there really isn't a good answer. I mean, I think education of the community members and more of a partnership with the city council, the city leadership, and then community-based partners, public health, all having kind of a buy-in and a general conversation of getting that going first, then bringing in some community members to help educate the general community members. But once you get everybody together, get them all on the same page, make some decisions, and then you can go forward and like educating the general community to help them understand. And syringe disposal, I mean, Roseburg is actually a very good community for syringe disposal access. And I think, how do we model those areas that maybe people are living in, but people are going to use not all of them, but some of them in the areas that they're, camping. So I think it goes back to like, let's get a solution, like having safe places for people to go to camp and, transition them as fast as you can out of that situation, because that's a band-aid also, and getting them more stabilized into apartments, housing, but treatment, that might be treatment and longer term. Then somebody's successful in treatment, that's where I think the jail model is really cool, because then the jail can connect them to like Oxford House if they've been successful in their treatment. And that is a much better outcome than sending somebody out, that doesn't have stabilization in their life as far as housing and a secure place to go.
How long has the actual exchange of needles been going on in the park before they stopped it?
I believe it's been going on since the Connecting Point initiative includes multiple partners, and there's about 10 community-based partners that are all involved, and that's been going since about 2017. So the model of taking resources to people, and my understanding, most of that is just safer injection on the street, encouraging people to use stable locations for larger exchanges. Most agencies in the state of Oregon do a 1-for-1 syringe exchange, and making sure that people are bringing because there's a collection of syringes and disposal of used equipment and getting new equipment out there.
How long has the ban been in effect?
I believe that went into effect on June 1st. That it was in May, like the first May city council meeting that they implemented that, and I believe it was 30 days. And I think it just most the people, the peers out there are working with people, the community healthcare workers, and prevention specialists that are just working with people to make sure that, that they are safeguarded, they know where to go. Hey, go to office locations to get that access, or here's some other locations near you, because it was only city-owned property that it was just determined that they couldn't be handled on there. But I think it goes back to just general communication on multiple levels. But you need all the leadership, you need the city council, you need community-based partners all having honest discussions of like, hey, why not find different alternatives before implementing a ban? And I think the dramatic thing was that it included syringes for naloxone, and that was something that wasn't really thought forward before they implemented this ban, that, injectable naloxone includes syringes, and they're a muscle injector, an 1.5-inch needle, so they're not something that somebody would commonly use to inject into their veins, so it's a pretty hardy syringe that's not used for injection use.
Well,
so I think that goes back to the education. It's like, hey, let's have an education piece first, and like explain the different needles and what they are and what they're used for. And that might have just circumvented like, hey, people aren't going to use these to inject. But also, I think it takes all the community members. Like, if syringes are the problem, let's focus on the collection, and let's focus on proper disposal, putting a sharp collection box near the area. I mean, it's been pretty much ever since they implemented the ordinance for camping, and that was almost 3 years ago now. And I think that's when people went into the point, and they've been consistently, even though they sweep it and clean up, and then people go back in. So again, you go back to the housing issue, and why not solve the issue instead of giving them a safer space that might invite community support. I think at the last general city council meeting, they kind of ran out of time on some of the topics, but there was at least a dozen people that spoke on what is your solution for the point in people camping in the park. So I think, issue was brought forward, and now why not, work with the homeless commission to come up with some good alternatives, but they seem to have struggled on that spot. And that seems to be drawing the attention. Again, syringes are an easy, detour of the conversation. Instead of worrying about the people living in the park, we're going to worry about the syringes and illicit substance use.
Right. And you know that a lot of us, including yourself, and other organizations, Housing for Umpqua, since our inception formally in 2019, we've been requesting that people be moved out of the parks and into, various places where it's manageable for people to be temporarily, and then would be able to even address that harm reduction. And so, nobody, even strong housing advocates like myself don't want people in the public parks, living in the public parks. I don't want them living outside at all. So,
no, it's not, the situation we have is not humane. There's no bathroom access. There's no water access. I mean, it is not an ideal situation. I mean, looking at a public health angle is like, we have to understand they're doing something to use for basic bodily excretions that, so I mean, okay, and that's a public health issue, and it's like, okay, that's what we need to focus on, is like, and we're looking at like the city of Sutherland has Hastings Village, and that model was working there, where people were successfully being transitioned away, because I don't think camping is an ideal situation,
right?
But it's better than the situation we have, where there's no situation to put because I think police even appreciate when they have a place, and I know there's other communities that when the police find somebody that's unhoused, they know what to do with them. They know where to take them. It's like, hey, here's a place you can go, and we're going to take you over there and get you set up and hand you off, and that helps support the police department, because they don't know what to do either. If they don't, hey, what are we going to do with this person? We're just going to drop them off at the point. I don't know I don't know. That's not really something that's been discussed. Is like, what does our police department presently do right now when somebody's found to be unsheltered? They can't, there's no legal bounds to incarcerate them on that. I mean, I
I
know
don't, I don't,
they have,
I don't know what they're doing right now, but a few years ago they were just dropping, even though they were telling them to get out of Gaddis Park, they were dropping them in the parking lot, is what some people told me of Gaddis Park. So they would just remove them from one part of town and drop them in the parking lot. Well, we just left them in the parking lot. So I don't know.
I
I
think,
have no idea. Dane, I want to ask people, anybody else have any questions of Dane about he was talking about.
I do. I want to ask Dane, do you see how the recent executive order from the White House regarding homelessness is going to affect our situation here?
I think it's going to be challenging. It depends on what's going to happen from the court processes that probably are going to be happening, but it goes against what our governor in the state of Oregon want. But I think it goes more in hand with what some of our communities want. But I see you look at Grants Pass and they have safe camping locations for people, and they're moving forward knowing that they have to have a solution for that. And they were part of the lawsuit that went to the Supreme Court last time. I think it's going to be challenging. I think it's going to create a dynamic of, some communities are going to say, take that and roll with it, and just go, instead of coming up with solid solutions for homelessness. And then it included harm reduction. So I think, it depends on what happens with that bill, but I think it's going to give a lot of communities that are against homelessness an avenue to continue not doing anything. And that's going to be challenging. In our present situation, it seems like, a lot of buy-in gets, oh, well, our president just put this out here. Now this is what our plan is. And so I don't think it's going to be helpful. That's just my general, the outcome. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm hoping that, there's some lawsuits that challenge that executive order immediately because it goes against, but as we saw, the Supreme Court did not support when Grants Pass got there. They went with the city of Grants Pass over the homelessness. But that I give Grants Pass a lot of credit as they're moving forward with doing something. And even though they won it, they
have been sued again. They were sued again in January. There's a pending lawsuit based on disability rights issue, and they actually had a bid out recently to have an encampment made, in Grants Pass, and it was directly related to the attempt to settle that because there's a temporary restraining order against Grants Pass right now, and so they're not magnanimous. They were sued in January. And I'm hopeful that will help Roseburg get a hint about, that potential, which is, more likely a real potential here if they don't kind of change. And I'm hoping Grants Pass will be effective in convincing people. But the one thing I want to say about the Grants Pass case, because, this is stuff that I've done for decades, that was on a very narrow issue on whether it was cruel and unusual punishment. And and the courts really did leave it open to other issues, including ADA issues, which is what Grants Pass was sued on. They're actually sued, one of the main plaintiffs is Disability Rights Oregon. And on behalf of, because they're the protection and advocacy organization, designated one in Oregon. And so they're actually a plaintiff, although they have their own lawyers as well. And it's on the disability rights issue. So there's so many people, as you know, Dane, and I know many, 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 many people living outside have a disability that would qualify, under this, whether it's mental health, or physical disabilities or combination, cognitive, brain injury. But anyway, I digress. So we're at Housing First Umpqua is actually this week. This week we'll be doing just a discussion about the order and what we believe the implication is on the order. And we've invited folks from Lane County to participate in that discussion because we have a presence up in, somewhat of a presence up in Lane County, and try to start that dialogue of, what we perceive is happening. And you're absolutely right. I think these these bigger players than we are going to sue over probably most of the implementation of that. But I'll find out more before we actually do our show this week. I'll contact some of them.
And I agree with Betsy. Yes, there's that angle that they went after the ADA piece to, kind of go back at grants past to do something, and they did do something, and it did take a
Yes.
lawsuit because they had disbanded all the camping, and then they re-implemented all the safe camping locations. But I think that's what it's going to take is some lawsuits on. You go back, it's not a humane setting as having people living in a park, especially when they do not have access to bathrooms. You have medical issues out there, and maybe we need to look at that as an aspect of this, is like getting more medical providers out in the field. And that's Grants Pass does. Their team that goes out is called the Mint program, and they go to 2 different parks, 2 different communities. But there's medical providers as part of that, and they quickly identified some people that had some severe medical issues, and they were living outside, and that is how they got to that point. And I think that's what we need, is we need some medical providers to go to the park. These are amazing humans. I mean, they are amazing people. Everybody I've met out there, they're friendly. They engage with me. They don't know me. They know a little bit about me, but I can go out there and I'm not, you just, hey, how are you doing today? Be friendly. They're friendly. I don't understand the fear piece that our general community has, because they're great people. They just happen to be living in our parks. And, what can you do? You just support them and treat them like humans, and ask them what you might be able to do. Carry some water if you go out there, and hand them a water and a snack bar, and, try to, at least that moment. But you might be, by being that positive angle with that person and saying, I always try to make eye contact with everybody when I'm on the street, especially if they appear to maybe because they have their life belonging in a backpack. Hey, how you doing today? Just a positive greeting. And I think that might be, not everybody does that to them. So I think, that would help support them a little bit, at least navigating our world right now. Because I think they understand what's going on. They just don't know what to do. And they don't have the ability, like you and I, to pick up a phone or grab our computer, like doing this Zoom tonight. They don't have this ability.
Anybody else have a comment or question? No? All right. Well, thank you very much, Dane. So if somebody were going to ask people to do something about this right now, besides just saying, be nice, because I agree that you have to treat folks living outside, as you might other people, and um, maybe not, but depending on how you treat other people. But I think saying hi and acknowledging their existence as humans, as opposed to what I think some people look down on it about.
Hey,
But anything else? Let's say about this issue about the park and the syringes and you know and needle exchange and
let your voice be
naloxone.
let your voice be heard, especially like just do a little bit of digging and find some research on how syringe exchange programs, support people that are using illicit substances from a public health stance. And then some of the other topics that kind of came up is just like, but I think our voices are important, and our leaders of our community need to know our voices, and being at meetings and going to city council meetings, going to homeless commission meetings, because that seems to be where they're talking about the syringe piece. And if it's important to you, and people that might have illicit substance use, be that voice for them, that they can't necessarily have a voice all the time.
All right. So thanks again. So next up on the parks and the city, Zach and Paul.
We should introduce ourselves since you're new too. I'm Zach. I'm involved with community rights, Douglas County. I'm an historian by practice, and I'm born and raised here in Roseburg. And importantly for this, I played soccer for most of my young life, and I learned how to play soccer out on Fir Grove Field in Fir Grove Park. I was involved as not just a player, as a little kid in the recreation leagues, I also played in the competitive club teams. I played for the high school team, Roseburg High School. And also my first job was as a referee for the little kids out on the fields. And also quite often would be out there volunteering, painting lines for soccer fields with the old white spray paint. You want to give an introduction?
I'm Zach's dad. So yeah, I'm Paul Whitworth. I'm a designer. And yes, I was involved with this for this specific project. Yeah, my background in soccer, I started playing as a kid in Los Angeles at, 5 years old. In Roseburg, I played soccer. I've coached all kinds of levels of soccer all the way through high school. I've been a nationally a referee, certified referee nationally. I spent probably more time out at Fir Grove than probably just about anybody in this whole area. I've served on the soccer board, um, and so I understand what the this turf situation is.
Well, let's introduce it.
So for those of you that are not familiar with this, the Soccer Association wants to put in two soccer fields that are turf at Fir Grove Park. If you don't know Fir Grove Park, it is, I believe, the biggest public piece of grass in our community. It's a beautiful space. It gets used by a lot of different people, from picnicking to taking their dogs out there to I've seen people train their sheepdog out there. People are flying their planes, model planes out there. People set up volleyball and badminton. There's
Frisbee.
ultimate frisbees out
Yeah.
there every Sunday. Um, it's a beautiful spot, and the city is looking to basically destroy it, in my opinion, by basically probably taking approximately half of the park away to fill it in with, concrete and plastic, and then fence it off. Aesthetically, it would be devastating. Environmentally, I think there's a lot of issues there. And really, the soccer club's point of view is that Roseburg kids are not competitive at the high school level because they're not training on turf, and it plays different than grass. And so, which is, I mean, that has a very small validity to it. But my thought is just put turf somewhere else. But to tear out a beautiful place that we're so lucky to have in our community is tragic.
Mhm.
And I just don't know why you do it. I mean, you could just say, "Hey, let's take out the duck pond and we'll make a swimming complex out of it." I mean, you could kind of go on with things that are similar. And basically, as far as I know, like, nobody knows about this project. Um, and the soccer club kind of presented it to the city as like it's going to be so much more than just soccer. All these things are going to use it. Like, football is going to use it, and lacrosse is going to use it, and the high school marching band is going to use it, and you're going to be able to have concerts now in the park, and on and on and on. And all this money that's going to come in from tourism, and it's like, what? I mean, the soccer committee even said that they're unable to have a soccer tournament on regular grass versus having the plastic turf, which seems ridiculous.
And it's not, it doesn't historically add up.
It doesn't really make any sense whatsoever.
We had tournaments on that field when I was playing when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And so the claims that we need to have plastic to play on is not consistent with the historical reality here in Roseburg.
In the bigger picture too, just talking about the city, another group that I have been sitting on for years is Thrive Umpqua. I don't know if people are familiar with Thrive Umpqua in Roseburg. I mean, they do a lot of community stuff, right? So one of the committees I've been sitting on since they started it years ago is the Built Environment Committee. And so we're always trying to get information from the city, like, like what things are in the pipeline for maybe getting, built. And it seems like everything is just always like top secret. For example, like if we're just talking about parks right now, there's Brown Park. I don't know if anybody knows about Brown Park.
Yeah,
So
I wanted it as a homeless camp. I do actually know where it is.
So it's so for those that don't know, it is on the south side of Harvard and just west of Stewart Parkway, where the fire kind of next to the fire station there. Right now, it's kind of a grove of trees, big, nice trees that have been growing for years. And trying to find out what their plan is there is very difficult. Um, we actually invited people from the city to come to our Thrive Umpqua meeting, and they wouldn't share any kind of plan or anything like that. The only thing they gave us was it's going to be great because it's all going to be rubber surfaced, so it's safe, and they were going to put a parkour course in. And of course, our questions were like, well, whose input did you get to come up with this stuff? And
So,
they just decided on their own what it's going to be.
well, isn't there's a Parks Commission though, right? That's supposed to, in theory, the Parks Advisory Commission. Um,
Yes.
I did talk with the chair of that commission, and she indicated she's not going to be at the meeting tomorrow night, but that there needs to be some repair done to Fir Grove Park. That's the premise, right? That there's something that needs to be done. And the meeting tomorrow night is supposed to be just about directing the city to develop, to be able to pursue grant money for the repair, not an approval of this plan. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know anything other than what Zach sent out to even draw my attention to it.
From what I understand, the plan has been approved in the past,
Mhm.
without a actually specific plan. They just had like a rough plan and this big idea and yes, now there is actual civil engineering drawings of how they would do this. Which was at the last uh, city council meeting, so I've seen that in the packet. Um, and so, yeah, so you're right. They're voting on like, should they go forward and work on trying to get grant money to do this project? And of course, they're looking for $3 million to do this. I don't believe any other group would be using it besides soccer. I mean, something like that would come to mind for me is if you needed two fields, have one at Joe Lane and have one at Fremont. They're always complaining about parking issues at in Fir Grove too for soccer. So having alternative places would also help alleviate parking issues. And the schools could really benefit from that type of surface. You could have PE classes on it all year long. And of course, yeah, if you had, you'd be able to use it for middle school football and all that type of stuff. And I think that's a better solution.
Mhm.
I think if you
Has
look
that
at,
has that been discussed with any power? Because when you said that earlier, when you're talking about it earlier, that's exactly what I thought. Because I knew that there's an issue the schools are having with not wanting to maintain their fields, and I thought, well, why don't they just put these things on the field, right, of a school, right?
absolutely,
So the
absolutely,
band could go to the elementary school, like you said, Fremont or someplace.
yes, Fremont, the high school marching band uses Fremont Middle School for their end of summer prep camp. Because they need somewhere that they can use all day long, and they can't use the high school field because they're using it for football. And of course, Fremont is it's not marked out, so that doesn't help marching band at all. They need they need to know where to march. And then the grass is, really long. So having a turf field there would really benefit the band. In the proposal, it said that the soccer people said that the high school band would use this new place, and that would enable them to have band competitions and all that type of stuff. Well, uh, Brandon Hanson, who's the Roseburg High School marching band leader, is a friend of mine, and our son was the drum major at Roseburg High School, so I'm pretty familiar with all the band stuff, and it's 100% not true. And of course, nobody even talked to him at all. So again, things are being decided without having all the information. If you look at um, in what I sent to the Parks Commission, I sent a whole bunch of notes, and I don't think there's anywhere in Southern Oregon that I know of, or even from Eugene South, um, where they've taken a park like what we have and converted it to a sports complex, let's say. Because most sports complexes have been built on land that might have been like an industrial site before and cleaned up, those types of things. I mean, for example, like a really actually nice soccer facility is in Grants Pass. It's at the fairgrounds, and they have the horse race track at the fairgrounds, and they have 8 soccer fields in the middle of the horse race track, which was just dead space. So that, I mean, something like that, sure. I mean, I'm not an advocate for turf in any way, but if you were going to put it somewhere, that place works. But in our specific situation, I just think really destroying our park is just sad. And I think a lot of people would be, if they knew about it, would be upset about it too.
I think that the thing that really needs to be stressed is that this is not solely an anti-turf attitude that we have about this. Of course, we would say that we shouldn't have turf, and also just saying something along the lines of, as the soccer club seems to have said, that, well, there are other high schools and club teams that have really nice turf fields in other parts of the state, and we want to be competitive with them. I think that there is, there is a certain merit to that argument, sure, but internationally, in virtually every other part of the world, the standard in pro soccer and other levels is grass, not turf. There are plentiful studies done not just for soccer, but especially here in the United States for American football, by the NFL. The NFL's Players Union, the Players Association, has in fact demanded that the NFL remove artificial turf from all its fields, practice and game fields, and replace them with turf, because there are higher instances of injury and more severe injury on those kinds of fields. This is like the consensus. But even with that kind of thing said, and with all the environmental considerations as well, if this community really wants to have turf fields, maybe we could discuss it. Maybe it could be a discussion about, somewhere in town where we could establish a designated sports complex. But to say that we need to do this on an existing open public park in such a way that, in fact, doesn't add any more space, despite claims that there's a high demand for field space among sports teams in Roseburg and Douglas County. This is reducing space, and it's enclosing space in a gated area with fences. And in fact, our city manager, Nikki Messenger, was present at the last Parks and Rec Commission meeting. And there's, of course, a recorded video of it available online. And I can quote her. In her view, this would be a similar situation to the tennis center. The tennis center in Roseburg is effectively a private club. It is on municipally owned land, but its establishment is effectively a private club that really just a few people in the area use, and they have membership fees for. And on top of that, the expansion of that tennis center and also the wetland renovation that was done some years ago along Stewart Parkway actually eliminated a whole grass field that was used for many years for youth soccer practices and games. And so really what's happened is a consolidation of everything into Fir Grove Field. And the discussion that doesn't really seem to be happening is, why are we saying that there's high demand and we need more space, yet we're trying to cram everything into one park? And to do so, we're actually going to even reduce the space in that park even more
by adding parking too.
by adding parking too.
So I have to say, actually, after Dane's talk there, this feels like a kind of a silly topic. I think
No, actually it doesn't,
I
because
don't. I think
it's really about the authority, right? Who's making the decisions about what's happening in our community.
yeah,
It
and
doesn't matter
I
soccer or
anything, right? Yeah, I mean
homelessness.
a park
Yeah.
master plan. I mean, and what I even like the Brown Park, which I don't know that much about. It would be great if there was public open houses and like multiple times so people have a chance to get to them, and there's a B, C proposal, and then people can weigh comments in, and the final thing is a little bit of concept B and a little bit of concept C, and you know good.
Mhm.
Jane, did you have a comment or question?
no. I think that is spot on. I mean, I'd rather see the city of Roseburg, if they're going to put $3 million into something and get a grant, is to find a more stable place to help support get people out of the parks. But why not utilize and clean up like the Brown Park? I didn't even know that was a park. I thought it was cat. I go by there quite regularly every day on my way to work, and I'm like, that would be a perfect. I thought the Catholic Church owned it, and I was like, that'd be a perfect spot to put. Why don't they utilize that to help some space? They could make that into. It's too close to homes, but you know, ideally, I think this is spot on, and it goes back. I put that chat in the chat is like communication. They need to have better formalized conversations. Like they can come up with an idea, but then get the community buy-in from the community leaders or elected officials, and then go to the community and ask for their, hey, is this what you really want? And because I think, why not just look at a park that's not being used, and if that's what you want to do with this money, revitalize a new area and clean up a park that's not even a park yet. But I was thinking, I didn't realize that the tennis center was private. I was kind of Google searching the map of Roseburg, but it seems like ideally in Gaddis near the sports park that they have, why not revitalize? If you're going to make a sports area, put it there. You got softball, there's a lot of open area in that area. If you're going to do something, do it close and so that people can use it, an area that's already part of a sports park, expand there and put the fields in there. But I don't know. I think it's spot on. It goes back to the communication issue.
Yeah.
Is that we need a better formalized, the city of Roseburg, more inviting people to the parks meetings to have these discussions and get some information and feedback from the general, especially people utilizing these parks. But what revitalize something else versus destroy something that is a nice area and a nice park already that's being used.
Yeah. I had posted about this on our Community Rights Douglas County Facebook page. Just a quick blast to get some basic information out and to ask people to show up to the next city meeting. And someone actually left the comment in defense of this project, and was giving that, well, we want our kids to be competitive, and Umpqua United Soccer Club is a volunteer-run organization. And also it noted that the soccer club hosts annual meetings that are open to everyone to attend. But even if we could have an annual meeting that's offered by a local nonprofit like that, people don't necessarily know what's going to be talked about in the meeting, or that they should show up to these kinds of meetings, that it's something, the population of a neighborhood is going to find worth actually going to, that they need to weigh in on. And so, like you said, Dane, yes, of course, it is a communication issue to a strong degree. And while I can also say that a lot of the claims that the soccer club put forward in their initial proposal are either straight lies or just very terribly misinformed about the character of the nature of turf fields, and the nature of this project, all the factors in it. Um, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm more inclined to think that a lot of people were just misinformed, and this project just has been tried to be pushed through because it's something to do, because it's going to bring in investment theoretically. Um, uh, I think it's a problem of not critically thinking about these kinds of projects that are being put forward. And um, I think I'm especially saddened by the fact that Tobias Magavero, who was on the Parks and Recreation Commission, actually resigned ultimately over this. After the last commission meeting, he sent in a letter of resignation and cited my dad's letter that was sent into the commission, that I learned today was not even put before the members of the commission until their meeting had already started. And so they didn't even have a chance to read it seriously. There was no discussion about it. There was one thing mentioned by Tobias in his letter that the commission had only received one comment. Well, why is there only one comment? Because people don't know about this. And that one comment is very substantial, as Tobias himself says. And it's amazing to me that that there is not just this lack of communication with the public, but even in these commission meetings, this Parks and Recreation Commission meeting, and with the city council, there's no serious discussion being had about the pros and cons of these kinds of projects. They're being pushed through, and even people who, if they're informed, might make a different decision, are voting to send this on to city council, or city council is voting to approve it. They don't know any better. The city administrators are not giving them the full story. I don't think that's a conspiracy. It is how the system happens to work. I find that disheartening, but I think what it calls for is, yes, a renewed understanding in city government and administration that the public has to be involved to a serious degree in especially projects of this scale that are very imposing upon upon really people, not just people who use the park, but the whole city. I mean, this kind of thing also sets a precedent for how we even think about what a public park is supposed to be, who it belongs to, who gets to use it, and what a public park is for. And one of the great things about our public parks, and especially Fir Grove Park, is that even while, and I would quote Nikki Messenger from the last commission meeting, even while she says, this is a sports field, this is going to be a sports complex. The great thing about Fir Grove Field is that it doesn't have a set purpose to it other than being an open public park for people to do whatever they want with. You can have a picnic out there. You can fly your RC plane out there. You can throw balls with your dog out there. Or you can just lie down. That's totally fine. Saying it's got to be a sports complex is giving it giving it priority to those who want to play certain sports. And
Or
that's
can.
or
I'm gonna
can.
say or can, you know. So there's a lot of poor people. We have one of the highest economic challenged county, right? And that is significantly children who aren't playing soccer at all, certainly not in a more private arena. John, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, it's I well my son was a baseball player, and I go back far enough when they had baseball fields at Fir Grove there,
Yes.
and baseball has a pretty good tradition in Roseburg. In Douglas County, we've had a long time Legion program, and a lot of kids have gone on to play baseball in college and sign pro contracts. Some of them have even played in the majors, and I was kind of amazed when the soccer group basically pushed the baseball people out of there and said, we want to, we don't want, we want soccer fields there, and that was that. Excuse me, and that's why that's why Sunshine Park got built, and I was always kind of amazed by that because I'm thinking, well, look at how the success baseball has had in Douglas County, and and the kids that have gone on, and yeah, and it's like soccer, like you're saying, it hasn't translated into much of the next, a level, and so and I'm still kind of amazed that they seem to have an awful lot of power to get what they want, and I was thinking too when Roseburg High put in their artificial turf there for their football field. One of their arguments, or some of their arguments, was the same they're using now. It's going to get more use, and it's going to get more, and the band, and the band can use it. And now they're using that the same excuses for Fir Grove Field. I think it would just be a disaster to turn it into artificial turf, and it seems to be something that the powers to be really like, because I guess it reduces the maintenance and it reduces a labor costs at least day in and day out. I mean, it doesn't reduce any costs when they got to replace the field, but it seems that's where their mentality is or something. Like, well, it really reduces a daily labor cost. So yeah, but I certainly hope that it doesn't go in, and I'm really glad that you guys are really trying to fight this.
Yeah, that's
Anybody else?
so. I was
Sorry,
just,
go ahead.
if anybody has any other comments, sure. But I was just going to say, since you brought up the high school, um, before they put the turf in at Roseburg High School, I was told that they were spending $100,000 a year to maintain the football field, and basically nobody was using it other than I think the band had limited use to it, and of course, when it got wet, then it was not great for the band to be sloshing around in the mud there. But I was, what is it, how many football games did they have a year? Five?
Yeah.
And so like they didn't. I mean, I played football for Roseburg High School. We didn't practice on the field. We practiced adjacent to it, and everybody had to stay off of that field at all times. So I kind of laugh. I mean, I played football at the college level, and I've been involved in other sports, and I know I have friends that that are Olympic athletes and stuff like that, and
FIFA World Cup referees.
yes, but people have kind of a warped perception of how good their kid is, in the world and what it takes to be at that next level. But you are right, John. Baseball's been has had a lot of success, and I'm surprised actually that Legion Field decided to go from all the natural surface to turf. I mean, I guess they just figured that was a maintenance thing too, but I suppose it matters less in baseball, but as far as the surface that you play on, but it seems like a shame.
Well, I think that getting the program back at UCC probably had a lot to do with it, and, because they start playing in February or March or something. So I think that had a lot to do with it too. So, but
Well, there you go. There's another location for a field is UCC. UCC right now is it's completely torn away their old track. They're putting a nice new modern track in that's supposed to be all done for October 1st, and they won't have anything in the middle. I don't know what they're going to do with it. Maybe they're just going to throw some grass seed and let it grow. But there's another place that it could be used for a lot of different people and have its own parking location.
I think that's an excellent idea. You ought to suggest it. So really, I mean, find out, contact the college, contact the president
Well,
of the
I'm
college.
actually very good friends with the president.
Yeah, so, throw it at her.
Well,
So,
it just like she told me, she said it just comes down to money.
yeah,
But if you're fundraising wherever it's going to be or looking for
right.
grants or whatever,
Yeah.
and if it truly could be available to a wider range of people, then you've got more funding possibilities than if it's really
Right.
just a soccer specific facility.
Well, and I would think that, the places, I don't know how the collaboration on grants go these days, but I would think there would be an ability for the city to help solve this problem, right? If that's what they want to do. And it could be at UCC. It doesn't have to be on city property.
Yeah.
I don't think that's a requirement.
That's the other thing that Zach kind of touched on is really to be able to use what they're proposing at Fir Grove, you'd have to be part of the soccer club, which is not cheap.
Right.
So that puts a lot of people out of being able to use it as well. If they put
Well,
it, sorry,
yeah. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I mean, it just eliminates a lot of users right there, just money wise. And if you were gonna, okay, the grass does need to get improved now because it hasn't been touched since I think about 2008. I think is when they reseeded the grass, and it was incredible then. But just think if you could raise $3 million, how much could you put into paying for coaches to come visit and do training camps for kids and pay for kids to play that couldn't afford it and all these types of things.
Yeah.
One of the other problems with the financing of this thing that was also not addressed, that was very briefly touched on in the last Parks and Rec Commission meeting, was Nikki Messenger, the city manager herself, brought this up and said, yes, it's a $3 million project, but we're only thinking about this initial project. There's no actual plan
For 10 years down the road.
for 10 years down the road, or less than that, depending on use.
When it needs to get replaced.
So the question of long term, how are we going to pay to replace this field as it degrades is not being asked. It was not discussed in the commission meeting. And also at that point, we're talking about a whole turf field that's going to end up, what, in a landfill? That's also a huge waste.
So what can people do? So for tomorrow night, I mean, what are you asking for? Not to make the decision, get more public input, what? And how can people help?
I think people on the city council don't even know that this is a project.
No, especially
because it's been floating around for long enough that there's new people on the council and I don't think they even know about it. And yeah, I think more discussion about it. There's only been Plan A has been shoved in front of everybody. How else could we do this similar project? And in this community, where would it best serve a lot of people instead of just one place that's already a park?
I'm of the view that this present plan itself, which has been developed over the last 5 years by city staff, it's been designed and money's been put into that development. And I would consider that something of a waste. I would say that this present plan, the vote should be to cancel this present plan. But I would also say, with you too, is the question of field space and establishing new field space in this community is something that should still be on the table. I know that the baseball and softball fields that exist are pretty saturated, and they are looking for other spaces. But that space should not be it should not come at the cost of a beloved existing public park, privatizing it in the long run, potentially, at least at the very least enclosing it, and also doing so in such a way that would actually not establish any new space. I think it's a complete contradiction to think that this plan actually improves and adds space for people to play sports in this community. No, I think we got to think a little more broadly than just ripping up what we have.
So if you want somebody to do something tomorrow night, by tomorrow night, so the city council meeting's at 7, so they can go and show up there. But there's also, they can submit comments by a certain time in the morning, right? Written comments to be submitted to the city council.
I would
And
say,
they can also do it online. They can sign up to actually be in a live and make online comments during the meeting.
yes, it could be on Zoom. But I would also say that in the meantime, you can call counselors, you can email them, because even while the vote tomorrow, I think should be to oppose this present plan, even if it does happen to go through, it can still be canceled.
It's
After
yeah,
the
because the
fact.
vote is really just looking for grant money to raise that three million.
Mhm.
So it could still be discussed, right? You could still think about raising money for a sports complex in general, but the project that's been proposed could be looked at more closely.
Mhm.
Well, if you wanna send me something, Zach, particularly that you want said about this, I can put it in the discussion piece of, the live stream. And I will put the contact information to the city councilors in there because I already have that set up, that formatted. And tell people about the meeting. I'll put a link to how people can participate in the city council meeting. And is there either one of you or other people that they can contact for more information?
Yeah, you can reach out to me. I guess I can give out my I can give out my
That's
email.
up to you. That's why I asked.
Sure, you can contact me. My email is 1025orchard@gmail.com.
Type it in.
No, I go back to the communication issue, and I think that especially after what you said, like city councilors don't necessarily get the information in a timely manner from that email is like emailing the city councilors themselves also, which is public information on Roseburg's website, but will it still be enough time for them to make an informed decision? I think they're kind of being put in this hard spot of all the information is coming their way tomorrow.
Yeah.
How can they make an informed decision if they haven't been understanding what has been the discussion points up until now?
Yeah, and I think there's enough issues to be raised to say, listen, postpone this. Now, if there's a timely grant need to say, I've seen those situations. We need to ask for money and we need to start doing it. Now, fine, right? But with the but want to have a community input discussion about it, and both sides. And just as a caveat, when people are city administrators, they have a ethical obligation, if they're actually trained professional public administrators, to give all sides to a situation, right? They're not really supposed to go there with their biased opinion, and they can certainly have an educated opinion. But this is like, if you read what, the documents that people are trained as public administrators, that they're really supposed to have that. And my concern is, I don't see that when they've already kind of, even, with the one having to do with the needle exchange issue in the park, there was really no real public dialogue that I saw about it. I mean, you got the word out, and so some of us showed up, but there was no, even somebody like me that does, deals with homeless issues, I wasn't even aware this was on the radar, because it had been so long that it had been allowed to happen. So what in the heck triggered it? Why would they want now a turnabout phase? And it seems the same problem with the soccer thing, right? They're looking at, whoever, for whatever reason, and the staff may be more pushing their agenda than they really should be. And the people who need to know what's happening and the implication of the people making the decision. There's actually, the Oregon meetings law says deliberation and decision in public. The body needs to make that. And that doesn't happen if there's no real discussion and they're taking the word. So I think there's a couple of fundamental, just good governance issues going on here. And they do lead to communication. How does the word get out? That kind of stuff. And so, hopefully these two things start to bring to light, but the other side is going to be people out there actually doing it, right? The citizens saying, I want to know what's going on. Even if I don't show up to a meeting, I want to know what's going on, right? I then get to decide whether I'm going to show up to that meeting or not. But if I don't even know or have an understanding of why they're even doing it, how does that ever happen? So Kevin, you've been quiet. You're still there, I know. So anybody else want to make any of the comments? And if not, Kevin can say goodbye. And, our next shows are going to deal with some homeless issues as well.
One thing I was just going to say, Betsy, is it would be interesting if the city just had a open house once a month with like, hey, here's 10 things that are happening or being proposed in town, and it was like a regular thing, and people could kind of go to it and like be involved and see like what's going on. And it could be something with parks, or it could be the needle thing, it could be a whole variety of things, and people could really educate themselves if it was like a consistent open house, like I said, maybe once a month, or maybe it's every other month, whatever it needs to be. I mean, some kind of format like that where you wouldn't have to be like searching to figure out where all these things are. It's just happening on a continuous basis. And if you want to be informed, you can go and get yourself educated.
A town meeting is what we
Yes, a
need.
town meeting, basically, yes.
Well, and even all the public record stuff easily accessible, and people know what's going on. If you know that they're going to discuss Fir Grove Park, and say, even on their website, say, hey, this is where you can find all the information about it.
Yeah.
Right? They can make little videos. Look at us, they can be even this amateurish. They can go home and make a video about whatever the heck they're doing. There's some way. It's, just the information period, but then the right to public input does have, the value too.
Well, thanks
so
for
Kevin, where are you?
I'm right
yeah,
here.
thank you.
Even coffee with a counselor, even the minute input that could be created with just the dialogue.
Yeah.
Well, is that it, everybody? We happy? Sorry, I've been away. Although I have been listening to great interest, because I do remember going to Fir Park a lot. I'm not on that side of the county anymore, so I stayed out of it relatively. But I want to thank everybody for coming in. It's been a pleasure listening to you. I want to thank all our guests and all our listeners, and of course, Betsy Cunningham for setting all this show up. If you have any questions or concerns, and if you want to get in contact with us with an idea or something that concerns you, please get a hold of us at our email, SOPP, Southern Oregon Progressive Podcast at gmail.com. And it'll be in the link in our description and everything like that. Thank you for coming by, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you.
Goodbye.
Thanks, neighbors.
Thank you.